Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Now, mai hoki mai, you are about to listen to an interview with a very smart woman, Kim Aitken, Collective Intelligence member and EHF fellow. Started life in Ireland, by Canada to New Zealand. A very smart engineer who has developed a new technology about to be launched in New Zealand in November. If you are interested in housing at all, the future of housing, future technology of housing, this is worth listening to. She has developed a technology that is absolutely groundbreaking, incredibly simple alternatives to what we're using now. So enjoy. I am really excited about this interview. Kia ora everybody, welcome back. Today I am talking to Kim Aitken. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning.
We are at the beach at Aramoana in Hawke's Bay. And before Kim's got an important meeting, and I've nabbed her on the way to that important meeting. And this morning we are talking about a stunning new innovation that Kim has created, and I'm really excited to talk about this, called Truss House, which we've got a wee photo that you can see of Truss House on the link. So, Kim, I'm just going to dive straight in there because people only listen to this shit for about 10 minutes and then they zone out. But tell me straight up about Truss House, and then I'm interested to know how you've got there. So what is Truss House?
Truss House is using a process that 97% of houses in New Zealand already use in a new way, allowing everybody in the country to have a warm, dry, high-performance, well-insulated, inexpensive house.
So what are 97% of people using already?
Roof trusses. So the roof truss is the pretty bit that you see on the back of trucks and standing up on the top of your walls on a traditional house. It's a technology that came in the 60s to replace having to cut every rafter and, create what's called a cut roof. And that technology became very quickly outdated and replaced with something called a truss roof system, which is using bridge technology, triangles, lightweight, cheap, fast. There's 65 places in New Zealand already make it. And it's just a awesomely highly engineered, very simple product.
And what are you doing differently? What are you adding to that?
So what we're doing is we're taking out the need to actually build the house first. And we're using that awesome, simple set of triangles, all highly engineered to make a lightweight house frame. So you end up with a much faster way to put your house together, but you're using amazingly complex and incredible software in the background to do it, and it translates to the simplest way you can build a house.
And so what it took me a wee while to get my head around, and I'm a slow learner, and that's okay, but what you're doing is the trusses aren't just on the roof, they're on the sides and they're under the floor.
Yes, and they're all connected when it shows up. So the game that children play where they stand up a whole bunch of dominoes, it's that simple. You stand them up in a line, whatever shape. You can make S's and T's and nearly every letter of the alphabet in terms of the shape that you want. And that's your house. It's that quick, it's that fast, and it's that low tech but high tech at the same time.
So the computer system has worked out what because there is a huge amount of technology behind building trusses, right? So on your loading and all that sort of carry on. So the computer in the workshop has worked this out, that you need to build the roof trusses, but the wall trusses and the floor trusses.
Yep, exactly.
And then what I love about this, then the community can put it up.
So the primary advantage is the community initiative. So the community need for housing is complex. What the communities in New Zealand around the world are struggling with is the disconnect between that complexity and the actual problems that you need to solve with housing. And the simplified way in which you can understand housing by seeing and understanding the truss house system, by designing almost any shape, you know, it just becomes a really simple tool. We see it more as a tool to understanding and creating and designing community-led housing by the people who are going to be living in the houses, not by someone who is making decisions based on optimization of materials or, you know, any of those factors that usually drive what you end up living in this country.
So it will be stronger?
Yep.
It will be warmer?
Yes.
Because you've got insulation all around it?
Absolutely. Thicker walls, cheap insulation, easy to do, quick to do.
More expensive?
Same price as a regular house.
Same price, but way more advanced.
We're 7 times building code minimums for insulation, and we're adding some high performance elements such as air tightness so that your house is not only warm, but it also doesn't draft, which is, you know, when you're in a windy country, a huge issue. And then what happens from a structural standpoint is over time, like any other, like your car on the road, general wear and tear happens to your house. The wind, you know, storms, rain. So, you know, new houses are great for a period of time. And after, you know, 15 to 20 years, those houses become leaky and drafty and, you know, seals go. And what New Zealand struggles with is that is generations of houses built to that standard, and Kiwis are awesome at living with it. But what happens fundamentally in a house that's not functioning is that you end up with massive health impact. And because of the shortage of houses, a lot of houses end up being overcrowded. So you've taken houses that are, you know, poorly designed fundamentally, and then you overcrowd them full of people because there's such a need. And it's like, you know, anything else. You've got normal wear and tear, and then you've got accelerated use. So that's really what's happening in New Zealand and in Canada and in lots of countries in the world, is the crisis is driving a misuse of a house, and those houses in themselves are poorly designed. And that's all a result of the 60s through to about the early 2000s. And it's coming to a head very, very fast with climate crisis, floods, you know, heating, you know, an overheating of the Earth's atmosphere is putting people in precarious living conditions, and nobody's ready for that, least of all the slew of houses that were kind of chucked up in that period of time.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Climate resilience.
Oh, yeah,
that warming that's coming, that floods that are coming, the, you know, windstorms and hurricanes and you name it is coming. And it's already started, and there's 40% of the Earth, as we sit here at the moment, is experience either floods or droughts. You know, we're in the middle of what's going to be that. We're a little bit further away, you know, we're a little less risky, but we don't have to look further than Australia to see what that translates to.
So since I've learnt a little bit about the truss house and seen the design, it took me a wee while to get it, right? It took me a wee while to get it. And then when I saw the video of them going together, I went, oh, I could be involved in that. I could do that. And when I think about the insulation factor, and then since then, as I drive around the country seeing houses built, I go, that's really fucking stupid, right? Because we put this insulation in, but the wood is only, you know, it's not 4 inches, it's less than that, you know, it's 95 mil, and it just lets heat in and out like crazy.
Yeah, that's the bit that you have to scratch your head a few times. And it took me a while, and I was a structural engineer and saw buildings as structures. It took me, you know, quite a few years into my career to actually recognize that the performance of a building, like, you know, you wouldn't, and I'm paraphrasing somebody, an expert in this field, you wouldn't buy a new car and ask that they come and assemble the sections, you know, bits by bit in your driveway. You know, the real crux of high performance anything is the precision that goes into the creation and the engineering and the actual addressing of all of those factors. So the putting up bits of wood and putting little bits of fluffy insulation in between the wood and calling it a home is, pretty much you've just built a go-kart, in your driveway. And then at some point you've got to take your family and put it in that go-kart and, take them to town. You can't. It's got a limited use and a limited shelf life. And that's the bit that never really gets applied. People think, housing, there's a crisis. We need more houses. It's like there are already 40,000 houses that were built through the last 40 years that need to be replaced just of government stock alone.
Yeah.
Because of what was built, not the quantity, but the quality.
Yep. So you won't have any evidence yet, but so are you thinking these truss houses will last longer?
Oh, well, we do have evidence because we're using a software that's been running since the 60s, and that software is intricately connected to every element of the building code across the world. The software we're working with, and it's not our software, is developed by the fourth largest company in the world. So they're at the leading edge of design, and I know you can move, I can travel to the other end of New Zealand and I'll walk into a fabrication plant and they're using that software, and that software already knows, click a few buttons and you're doing the highest wind load, highest earthquake. It automatically takes all of those factors into consideration. So you're not bespoke engineering every house to meet, where are you, where on the coast, there's so many factors. It's complex, probably boring for a lot of people, but when you start to think about how you need your house, nobody else's, to perform for you, that's where it starts to be the most critical when it comes down to safety, health, security. So
we are going to get on to the story of how the hell you've got here, but the thing is that I've this, I'm literally sitting at a table looking at, you've brought a little model of a truss, and I'm looking at it and going, it's fucking genius because it's so simple. And I've seen the video of them going up and I'm going, so why? And look, I've got a number of friends who are looking to build houses at the moment, and I'm saying to them, stop, wait, don't do this thing now, just wait, because this technology's coming. What's holding it up? Why can't we do this thing now?
There's no fundamental applicable reason. We had a choice to make. I've been in New Zealand 2.5 years. Coming to New Zealand, choice one was to become a builder, become a building company, hire in some trades, build these for people who need houses, want houses. Let's call it want houses. What would be people with land, with money, who can make choices about what it is they're going to put on that land. And that initial market, which we did in Canada, is a very easy validation market, because what we're offering is what is almost untenable. Nobody else can do this in the market. And the learning from our experience in Canada was, while that's effective immediately, it doesn't have a long-term impact on communities. So the decision was to actually flip it on its head and build relationship in community and understand community needs and then start to implement. So we really needed to set up our baseline understanding of what is the cause of the problem in New Zealand, more regionally than urban. And then really understand what are the needs of the people within those communities and work from there up, from a community level up. So we're just about at the crux of being able to take first steps within the next 6 weeks on making available what it is that we've been working on. And we needed to do it in a way that we weren't turning around and going, sorry, no, not you, sorry, no, not you, because we committed ourselves to, the slow, laborious process of building houses for other people.
Because the other aspect that, and you're touching on, is that this is more than just about building a really smart, well-insulated house. This is about communities being able to build, because of the way the trusses come in, that communities can get together to build houses. It's
every part of its self-determination in housing. And I think the way we can frame it up is, the if-then scenario. So if a community had access to a locally made, inexpensive, low complexity, high value housing system, what can that community then create for themselves and go forthwith to solving their own problem? And different communities have different needs, whether it's land, whether it's the finance, whether it's the product, whether it's the people. And that is the self-determination only comes from having autonomy and having choice. And those choices don't have to be incredibly large decisions, but the simple choice of, not having to pay large electricity bills, choice of being able to pay for school sports instead of, paying those bills, paying rent. There's just such a disconnect in quality of life versus the cost of keeping a substandard roof over your head. It's like an older car. You've got to keep paying for maintenance. You've got to keep chucking money at it. And at the end of the day, it's
not as safe and all of that. Yeah.
And it's not a sustainable way of life.
So, Kim, next Monday, I've got the pleasure and opportunity of helping one of our members, Rachel Rose, is building I'm going to call it a hay house. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but she put something up on LinkedIn, and I saw this, and I went, "Oh, I want to go and help on this because they're putting the walls up or something." And Rachel, forgive me, I don't know what we're doing, but I'm turning up on Monday to help, and I'm really I feel really good about this because I am going to go and help her in this very, very small way to build her home. And that fills me with a great deal of joy.
Yeah.
And I think about the truss house and concept and go, I would like to be involved in building other people's homes in some small way when I'm needed, because I can be involved in this. And thinking about a family point of view. So, I've got a number of, as I said, building houses at the moment. I'm going, just wait, stop. And you need to you need to look at this. And so that's the thing it's such a different offering, Kim, than what we've got now.
Yes. And I think when you actually look closely culturally at the more native communities and cultures around the world, housing was a function of a community. It was a natural byproduct of how communities connected, how they lived. Nobody worked in isolation on their own house, and their neighbor was working in isolation on their house. The traditional barn raising in Canada was, a community would get together and everybody would build everybody's barn, and that functioned because it took out the singular nature of me and my whānau, and that's it. I've got mine.
The status symbol.
Yeah, status symbol, the status symbol, but also the scarcity mindset. I've got mine. I'll lock my door. I'll not look out the windows. And if you're living in your car next door, sucks to be you. There is very much a pull up the drawbridge and don't look too deeply, or you'll find many, many layers of what the root cause of the problem was in the first place. And we see this in society. We see this in lots of indicators or symptoms of this lack of belonging. And when we talk about community, which we do on our website or in talks, we're not talking to a regional community necessarily. People's community, it's their whānau, it's their people they work with, it's their people of a similar interest in sport. Your community are the people you intentionally choose to be around. And those communities are incredibly powerful, and you more than anybody can understand what that is. And I know that within a community, putting your hand up and going, I'm doing this thing, can you guys help? We've had that experience already on the East Coast in Tolaga Bay, where one of our gorgeous clients, Rick, his family home was dropped by the building lifters and, more or less coming apart in pieces. And after a lengthy legal battle, he got settlement money. And the first thing the community did was rally around to help him just, take apart piece by piece his family home. And the traumatic nature of needing to take that house down was let's say, softened, for want of a better
Yep.
term, by the community coming together and being there and working through that process. And that idea is building the house. Rick's new house will be built in exactly the same way. It will be the same people in the community coming together, participating, supporting Rick. And it's not about, it's not about measuring that. You can't measure what that means to somebody. You can't measure about, well, it took 3 days and, 7 people showed up on day one. None of that is important. What's important is that community were able to come together and help one of their own. And if we take that idea and scale it through this country and scale it through the world, then none of us would need to shut our blinds and, stop looking at the window and just focus on our own. It's become...
It's such a, this community and belonging is so complex. I listened to a great podcast recently about a chap who started a community. It was around inviting people for dinner, and he invited just random people and got them together, and this thing sort of took off in Europe and in the States. And he studied communities, and he studied the impact that we have on each other, right? And we have so much more impact on each other than we realise. And who you hang out with makes a huge difference to your life. And there was an interesting piece of science in there that if you hang out with people who are obese, you are more likely to become obese. If you hang out with people who hang out with people who are obese, that influence flows through, even though that's one person away. Now, I don't know how the hell that works, but there is science backed up that who you surround yourself with makes an enormous difference to your life.
Massive. Yep.
And I that's what collective intelligence, part of it's about, is hanging out with people who do not agree with you. It's one of our mantras, right? People say, is it like-minded? I go, no, it's like-hearted, and there is a big difference. Yeah. And at a board meeting last week, I said, the membership, the people coming on board is changing. Like, we're getting more change makers joining collective intelligence because they need that support going out, and they're seeking this diversity to help them with the change. But this is and you've got a meeting today, and I'm imagining that conversation is not going to be about the house, but it's going to be about the community.
Absolutely. I think restoration of community is, there's a lot of talk about regeneration, regenerative communities, regenerative agriculture. The idea that we all get to choose our community is maybe a little outdated, and I think that's a real part of this mission or vision that we have, is the restoration of community. For those who are in it, we are, both of us, you and I, in communities that we have choice. We are intentionally members of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. We are intentionally members of Collective Intelligence. We get to stand and choose.
Which is a privilege.
Which is a privilege. Neither of us were, forced to be somewhere else on someone else's decision and be apart from our community. Yep. That would be devastating. And that's something that does not, when you think about housing and homemaking and sense of home, a lot of people don't have that choice. You've got to leave your community to get work. You've got to live in a place that is close to your work so you can go to work. You've got to live a lifestyle that is really around that place. What's the lifestyle in that place? Whether it's 3 locks on your door and no green space, there's so many factors that are the absence of community are contributing to a lot of the problems. And the idea for us is, if we look at Trust House, for us is a community building initiative. So you can start to rebuild your community around a regenerative housing option and bring people home. And what does home look like? And that is fundamentally from the groups and the conversations we've had with so many people, including, I was one of those people when I came to New Zealand. I had no home to go to. I had no placemaking people. I was, I moved around looking for somewhere to call home. And that in itself was such an experience to meet people on that similar journey who are not choosing. I didn't choose that. That was a circumstance that I found myself in, but I had autonomy of choice. I could get in my car and go somewhere. And I think the cultural disconnect is so much the symptom of almost every systemic problem we can talk about in New Zealand and in the world.
The word regeneration means what to you?
Self-sustaining, gives more than it takes, and it can organically grow as the process evolves.
Nice. That's really succinct. Giving more than it takes. And that's what your desire is with Trust House.
Yeah, 100%. It's a tool. We talk about it as a tool, which is confusing when we talk to builders, but it's just really a way of, it's just a way of creating an intentional understanding about housing. It's a way of transferring knowledge in a community between, we talk about high performance building, and New Zealand's going further and further down that, we won't call it a rabbit hole, down that pathway to understanding that, high performance building, like a high performance car, that evolves and changes with the needs. If you look back to maybe 15 years ago and ask somebody, what do you drive? Oh, I've got a Bentley Continental, 8-liter V12, that's a high performance vehicle. But really, if you start to look now at what's going on around in the climate, that's not a high performance vehicle. That's a terrible, terrible vehicle. And a high performance vehicle might be a Tesla. It's optically what's high performance. Well, something that isn't causing damage to the environment and contributing to, to our carbon emissions. So New Zealand is fundamentally also going through that shift to, well, what's a high performance house? And a high performing house in New Zealand pretty much up until about 3 months ago was something within the regions of Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and it's performing really well as an asset class. Like, that's what housing in New Zealand has become, whereas high performance building is really a house that performs for you so many functions in a sense. That's warm, it's dry, clean air, efficient use of water, efficient use of energy. That's a high performance house. And that's where the transition from the code and the way it's been done to what's needed in New Zealand, which is those higher performing houses, is a monumental shift. It's a mindset shift. It's a technical skills shift. I think I read an industry that is going to put 48,000 new high-paying construction jobs on the table for New Zealand. But you look around and you go, well, we've got no people. So it's great that that's going to create 48,000 new jobs, because it's...
Where are they going to come from?
Where are they going to come from, and where's the knowledge going to come from? You're not going to take every tradesperson in New Zealand and go, hey, sit down, I'm going to tell you something, we're now going to do it a different way. It's a gradual transition from, I'm a Toyota mechanic, to I'm working on a Tesla. You're not a mechanic, you're an electrical engineer. And that's the scary part, because what will happen is those who don't have the ability to step into premium price products are going to miss. They're going to be the people that are going to be living in the worst of the worst of the worst. It's going to get worse.
Look, this is a bit of a diversion, but talking about high performance cars, I was in the mechanics the other day, and there was this lovely modern Jaguar there. And there was obviously something, I don't know anything about cars, but there was something major shit going on there. And I said to the guy, what's going on there? He said, we're waiting for a new engine to turn up. I went, what? And he said, well, yeah, it got overheated. And he said, in the good old days, we'd just take off, this bit off the top and change this and change that, and we'd sort it. But now we've got to order a whole new engine because you can't fix the engine. Yeah,
it's hybrid at the moment. You're in that. The cars are really part mechanical, part electrical, and now they're transitioning to electrical. And it's like, hey, I've got a new house, and it's got double glazed windows, which is the equivalent to I've got a car and it's got a really big engine, and it's I'm going to burn lots of fuel, but hey, I've got a hybrid, I've got a little battery, I can do 50 kilometers on electric. Like, wow, that's where New Zealand's at. It's kind of at that Toyota Prius
Right.
Great in theory.
With the housing situation.
Yeah, the housing situation.
Got it. So, Kim, you talk funny. In a nice way. I'm trying to be polite here. And you're an Edmund Hillary Fellow. And how the hell have you ended up here?
The funny talking bit is a growing up in Ireland funny, and I have to say the word Ireland for people to go, oh yeah, I was trying to figure out where you are. Now, when you say Ireland like that, I know you're Irish. So I spent my first 18 years in Ireland, 4 years in Scotland. The other half of my family is Scottish at university, before fundamentally, within a couple of years of graduating, emigrating to Canada to ride out the GFC, global financial crisis, and apply my skills as a structural engineer in the great Canadian wilderness, working in, really complex scenarios, mostly involving snow and wind and, really geographically challenging conditions, which gave me an incredible learning curve on structures, buildings, and how they perform when they're stressed. So I love the, New Zealand doesn't really get winters that are that cold. It's like, well, your insulation keeps the heat out in the summer. For the other 10 months when it's, really warm. Oh yeah. It's like, yep, whatever it is that's coming in terms of climate, I've pretty much seen it all. And that was where I've learned the majority of my craft. And I was here in New Zealand in 2019. There was a joint initiative between the New Zealand and Canadian government around a new trade agreement they'd signed to connect the two countries on, one call it transfer of knowledge, and housing was one for New Zealand in 2019 that was becoming a real talking point. And I had the privilege of coming here for 3 trips in 2019 to meet with Kiwi Build and connect with different government and companies to really look at adopting Truss House. At the time it was more going to be an occasional visit and working on a strategy that involved New Zealand adopting this process. And I came back in March 2020 for a month. Oh. And then the border shut. And then because I'm Irish, traveling an Irish passport, my kids are, one of them is Irish, the other is a Canadian passport. They shut the Canadian border because of COVID, and I found myself stranded with 2 suitcases and, my cats, being cats, sat at home by a neighbor, all very temporary situation. And with the closure of the border, we thought, well, you know what? We'll ride it out for a little while. And then as it started to become apparent that things weren't going to be over pretty quick, we'll all be home by Christmas. It was a case of somebody at the CEO network mentioned the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and I was super, super, super lucky to be cohort 8, one of the last people to be brought through on a global impact visa to New Zealand. And lots of shifts happened in Canada that were nothing really to do with us but changed our world, and New Zealand became home during that time.
Does it feel like home? Yeah,
very much. Very, very much. I think because of how we approached New Zealand and it was a time of such turmoil for everybody. We were very, very lucky in connecting with some incredible people who had been on incredible journeys and had arrived in New Zealand for a variety of reasons. I think if we'd been alone in that, stranded in a different country and trying to figure life out, it maybe wouldn't have been as easy to create and find community. That was the big piece. We found a community locally in our local town. Everybody was going through lockdown together. We were up in Northland. We met a community of sailors who'd been traveling the world and got stuck in New Zealand. Lots of conversation about immigration and, people who had been on an adventure and got stuck. And that, for us, we found that community. And then through the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, we found another community. And I had the original connection to New Zealand, which was the CEO network. So I found myself with 4 different groups, for want of a better word, to connect to and chat to and learn from and really integrate into New Zealand, which was, a dream, really.
And Kim, for listeners, you and I have just had a welcome weekend thing, I don't know, maybe a month ago now or something, in Wellington, which was delayed because of COVID, and we finally got to meet each other in person and spend 4 days together. And It's fascinating hanging out with that group, and I'm in cohort 8 as well, and hanging out in that group, some really fucking smart people in there, eh? It's
Incredible people.
just go, whew, it's and I just keep on getting just surprised, and go, and I love the diversity thing. There's a huge range of people there, and I think about the commonality is that there's a whole lot of people that are really brave and have had huge failures and just kept on going.
Huge. That I think, I know I've spoken of this before, but the idea of attempting to create change and doggedly continuing to take a step forward through all levels of personal, professional adversity, and doing so with humor, and doing so with humility, and doing so with a openness and a willingness to learn. That's for me what I find in the fellowship is that tenacity that comes from not giving up. It's the world is shifting so fast around us, and at all times, there's where can I go to feel safe, or do I stop reading the news? Do I, there's so many ways in which really looking at everything from climate through to the economy and the housing bubble and recession, you can turn a corner and there's a media trying to sell you a story that's going to give you anxiety. And that meeting people who've been walking their path and doing so, understanding that all of that adversity is part of a journey, and maintaining a joy and an enthusiasm for life, to me, is a miracle. As you say, you keep getting surprised.
And I think that is the thing that I reflected on in the room, of just the humility. Also, at the same time, people really happy to share success and not being scared about sharing that success. And I really enjoyed that, right? Because you get a chance to bask in other people's stories and so, and go, shit, this is cool. And I think, it is the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and would Edmund Hillary be happy with what's been created? And I only met the guy once, but I think you would.
I agree.
I think you would.
I've never met the guy, but I think the energy and the potentiality, and that seeing the bigger picture out with one's own personal goals and putting oneself in a place of service. And it's not a word I use lightly, but recognizing humanity needs all of us in different ways, and recognizing that the part that we can play for ourselves, ultimately, for other people, not for ourselves, but ultimately for other people, is a journey in itself, getting to that point. And some of us get to that recognition, sooner than others, and some never do. And it's not a good, bad, or failing. It's just a fundamental function of our time on this planet and what we're going to do with that time. And I think from the values of Edmund Hillary and the personal goals that he set for himself, but throughout that, what he saw and what he recognized and what he wanted to create, using that knowledge very much. He could have been a celebrity speaker and toured and been, gained adulation from crowds of people for his success, but he chose to stay and work and commit and live a very intentional life of giving back. And I think that's the point for a lot of the people that I've met in New Zealand, is that's an embodied value.
Yeah. Look, I met him when I was living in a place called Kimbolton, and Kimbolton is home of the New Zealand rhododendron gardens. So it's a high, cold place with a lovely free-draining soil, perfect for growing rhododendrons. And Ed had brought back a new species of rhododendron from the Himalayas, that wasn't here, and so he was bringing this in to give to the national thing, and it was August or September. It was a bleak bloody day, and he was being flown in by helicopter into this muddy paddock, and my job was to drive out in my four-wheel drive farm ute and pick him up.
Wow.
And all I could think was, oh, fuck, don't get stuck, This is,
Yeah.
And the thing that struck me was just what a shy man he was. This was not a comfortable thing. There was maybe 150 people there to greet him. It was a big deal for the community. He wasn't loving this. It wasn't like, I've got a group of adoring people here. And the other thing that struck me, he was a really big guy, right? Really tall, gangly guy, and not the building, climbing physique that I would imagine, and go, you're not even designed for this. You're such a tall, but I thought, but he's done it.
Exactly.
But it was really interesting to see going, I'm doing this for this reason, and, yeah. And it's interesting, I'm reflecting on, I've seen Aniki Goodall do that as well, who is the chair of the fellowship, and that Aniki would be very intentional and go, this feels really uncomfortable, but I'm doing it. Yeah. The engineering thing, Kim, where's that come from?
Yeah. I think asking the question why 3,000 times when I was a child. I like to know how things work. I find it taking things apart, putting things together, breaking things, lots of breaking things. It was a carefree enough Irish childhood, semi-rural, trees, fields, farms, sheds full of, we weren't on a farm, we were surrounded by farms, and my parents had an architectural salvage, so we had a garage full of bits and pieces that were saved from everywhere, and that was our playground. It was like real life Lego. Go out and start building what we could out of whatever was there. And tree houses, very much a rural tomboy. You play with the neighbors' kids, and that was it. There was not a lot of play dates and schedules and trampoline parks. There was a very different way of being a child. And through school I didn't find particularly hard. Found it quite boring. Created my own entertainment, which was a lot of getting myself in trouble. And that desire, I think, to marry an engineering brain with a desire to build things that actually worked put me on a pretty small course in university called product design engineering. So the idea was that you've got product designers who design stuff, and then you've got engineers who kind of create them. But they were looking at merging the two disciplines so that you could be an engineer but also a creator and a designer. And that was between an art school, very, very different environment, to an engineering school. And the University of Glasgow has a very 600-year history almost, with James Watt and lots of really important names in the engineering field. It was a real, highly regarded engineering outfit. So putting a foot in each camp with the art design and the engineering was a little bit of a niche spot, and I thrived. Like, I loved all of it. I loved the creation, and I loved the technical side of it. So that took me into 4 years at university, which also put me at 4 years with the British military while I was there, blowing things up, shooting guns, running around, just really exploring leadership and community and teamwork. And, I loved the complexity of what that world was.
So hang on, so this is a little confusing. So you're at university?
Yes.
So where does the army bit come in?
While I was at university. So the British Army have officer training units, small units at the majority of the main universities in the UK. So people who are interested in becoming full-time military officers are, I guess, recruited early, and then throughout university, weekends, summer breaks, during the week, you're basically following the training program of an army officer while you're studying, I guess, in your free time around your studies. And that led me, through different parts of the UK. I was a Royal Engineering officer cadet, so I got to work in that side of the military, and really from an army perspective, the idea was that little bit of pre-training really did a lot for their recruitment process, more from people who thought they wanted to do it and actually didn't. So there was 20,000 people at the University of Glasgow, and there was 120 of us who got recruited in and, given incredible opportunities to grow or not. And it was pivotal for me. Met some incredible people, and I've spoken about this before, from almost the gender neutrality that at the time the military represented. It didn't matter whether you were male or female. In a way, it was all about your commitment, your drive, your showing up, your doing it at whatever cost. There was no course given to, he's a guy, that's more important. She's not, she's a girl, she can do half the run. There was no quarter given, and that felt like a really comfortable place to be. And I think I managed to come out of that with a very balanced view on who we are as people, men, women, individuals, our flaws, our failings, when we give up, when we don't. It's a real study in human behavior and living, especially through that age of your life. I would come back after a weekend of 6 hours combined sleep, having spent it out in the woods. We're all choosing to be there, and my flatmates had spent the weekend partying, and, they're sitting around eating takeaway, and you're going, oh, what did you guys get up to for the weekend? Oh, we went out Friday, and then we were hung, and you just kind of go, oh, okay. And you kind of, you can't even explain. It's like our weekend in Wellington. It's like if somebody asked, it's like, what did you do for the weekend? You kind of have to take a deep breath and go, well, I found my limit, or, I couldn't quite, or I didn't, or, growth. It was just continuous growth, and I loved it.
And then the Canadian thing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that was an offshoot from my time at university, and then the time I met my ex-husband, and he was ex-military, and we were based in Ireland after university, and spent quite a lot of our time traveling to different parts of Europe for things like parachuting or hiking or, more extreme sports. And military parachuting was a big one for both of us. And we kind of realized this leaving for 4 days every week, or 3 days, 2 days, depending what we could get away with work, was actually, we were looking for a lifestyle that we couldn't get in Ireland. And at the time, the recession had kind of come and hit. And work-wise, the options weren't great. And we had already been to Canada and realized, well, actually, we were looking for skiing. I wanted to ski. He wanted to parachute. We wanted to camp. He had an interest in hunting. It was just, there was a lifestyle available that we really felt we would fit. So we did. We upped and moved and immigrated with at the time, a little baby and another baby on the way, which was a real motivator as well for us, was somewhere that children could be roaming free in the woods, really.
And whereabouts in Canada?
So we were 2 hours north of Toronto, so up in the lake country.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Gorgeous. Yeah, stunning.
A little cold.
Yeah, the Irish are always, it's just a dry cold. When you're in Kiwi or you're in Ireland or, even in the UK, you get this damp cold that sits in your bones, and no matter what you do, you're still cold. And then the idea of it being minus 30, which it often was, it's nippy. You got to dress warm, but you don't feel it to your bones. You can come inside, you get warm. That was it. Loved it. Loved the cold, loved the winter. Made an early decision not to move snow. Lots of time in Canada in the winter where we were spent moving snow, and then you start to resent the snow. So we luckily ended up living next to the town snowplow driver. So we'd wake up in the morning and our driveway would be plowed, and that was my, as long as I don't have to move that snow. Every time it snowed, I'm like, super exciting.
It's a big deal. My sister lived in Toronto for maybe 25 years, and she loved it. Loved the Canadians. She loved the West Indians in Toronto. It's the biggest West Indian community in the world, I think, is in Toronto.
Oh, wow!
And it just cracks me up. Go, why would the West Indians go to Toronto? It's just like
it is one cold place.
I just don't get it. But she used to feel cold when she came back to New Zealand. It was really interesting to see that. And she used to talk about the snow and, the temperatures were, I couldn't get over the range of temperatures in Toronto was something like 65 degrees Celsius range.
Oh,
and
even, at the
on
very
an average,
least.
Average year. On an average year,
absolutely. And that's, I think, for me, where when you look at design and you take in that range, quite often I would wake up and it would be minus 35 outside. And then in the summer it's plus 35. So you've really got to adjust your life to live in that kind of environment. It's really tricky. It's really the amount of stuff, clothes, boots, we just were, especially with children, overloaded with gear because everything from your tires changing your car, the liquid in your car, life becomes really complex living in a modern way in that environment. And then you start to really think about those who settled that area at the time when you've got nothing but firewood, and if you're lucky you've built yourself a hut, and to live and survive in that is some seriously hardy people who are innovators. You don't survive that by any other way. Pioneers and innovators, and it's an incredible nation of people who've made that home.
They're such nice people too.
Well, you have to be friendly to everybody because you might get one visitor and you might need them to come and save your butt in the middle of winter. So you could be nice to everybody because you never know who's going to come in. That's just my personal theory.
Kim, what was the eureka moment with Truss House?
Yeah, it came at a time of my life where I needed warm, dry, safe housing for my children and I. And I think for the first time I'd really started to look at, I had a good job, made a good income, I was financially independent when I separated from my ex-husband. And housing was our number one problem, I would say, throughout the time we'd been in Canada, because we'd arrived ready to take on building and renovating. It was our way. We were gonna work in the housing space. And then not long after we arrived, he unfortunately had a workplace accident. He was hit by a 32-ton machine, broke his back, and did some significant damage, and we didn't have health care. So we ended up burning through our entire deposit, and income and savings that we'd taken with us just on dealing with the medical fallout of that incident. And then we found ourselves renting, and he'd, being a homeowner for 15 years to then be a renter. And then because of his accident, there were mobility issues. We found ourselves all of a sudden being minority, in a very minority space, in a community we didn't really know, trying to find, without support, housing for him, and, what could we afford and how were we going to do it? He wasn't working. It just threw us into a total loop, and we never really recovered in a financial sense from that. It took a few years. And then by that point, when I found myself alone with the kids, I was like, I'll just rent somewhere smaller. I just need a 2-bedroom flat. It'll be fine. We can do it for a couple of years. I've got enough income coming in to support us. And we started to look, and by that time, the word crisis had started to be used more so in the community we were in. And I realized that what was available, small 2-bedroom apartments, were pretty terrible. Like, we're talking $600 to $800 a month in heating bills just to be there in the winter, and drafty and cold and ice and, real extremes. And I had that, holy shit, what am I going to do? That's not tenable. Like, it's just not going to work for me. And I was working with a friend at the time who they were building on addition onto their house. They had an older, like 80 square meter, 100-year-old home, and they wanted to do a big addition and, rooftop deck and, lots of exciting things. So I went to work with them on a plan around it. And I remember going up into this old roof, this 100-year-old roof had been through snowstorms and tornadoes, and, it was pretty much held together by old growth 4-inch lumber. And my friend was describing how he was going to cut it all open to get access to this rooftop deck they were going to build. And I was like, dude, you cut one of these pieces and the whole thing is, it's done. You can't touch it. You can't do that. And, he's like, well, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, you could just replace, it's 80 square meters, just get a roof truss, simple, quick. I'll give you the guy's name. We deal with them all the time. And he called me back a few days later and he's like, oh my God, he said, I can't believe how cheap it is to just replace our roof. And I said, in my mind, I had that moment. I know there's always that myth in entrepreneurship. I had that idea in my mind. I was like, if all I had to do was buy the roof, then I could afford to build a house and live just me and the kids. And it was literally that moment. I think that night I sat down and I was drawing up and sketching up what would it be to take that roof truss and turned it into a house. Just the roof, just that system alone on a foundation, no walls, no floor, just trusses. And that was, fortunately for me, because of my experience, I was able to create that. And that was the very first moment for me, 7th of May, 2017, when it became an idea that then I kind of realized, I've got to see if this is going to work, and it did. We built a house.
What does that feel like?
It felt like something I knew I'd been waiting for all my life. I think spending so much time creating and designing and it's a process. It's really a problem-solving process is all it is. And I always felt that there was, always a problem to be solved, always enjoyed that creative process. And when it happened, I was like, yep, this is it. This is what every moment I've spent in art school, at university, doing, building bridges with the military, every single tree house that I put together, I felt like all the skills that I'd amassed, that journey I'd been on, seemingly randomly put me in a place where each little nugget had a spot in my brain for what this turned out to be. So it felt like coming home. I was like, yep, this is it. This is me. This is my goal. This is my life. This is my future. There was no real... It got me through a very difficult time of my life. And within 6 months, I had a friend go, we just got to do this. He's like, I'll put 50,000 in. Let's just try it. Let's just do it. See what comes. And it started, and this where we are today, and a very windy path to get here. But ultimately what I believe is going to be, in the next 5-10 years, a normal tool for builders, designers, architects, people. People will be living in truss houses. I don't need them to know who I am. I don't need them to know my name. I don't need them to fundamentally really care about any of that. I just need this tool to be something that people can get access to, if that's their choice, to live in that way. And that's the crux, which is why it took a while in New Zealand to even come up with the Truss House website. It's like, well, if it's got to rely on us, then it's not like we're still creating it. Somebody in the 60s came up with this idea of roof trusses, and they had to go through a very extensive engineering design process. And then they had to convince all the builders who'd be building cut roofs for 600 years that this was the next, this was the way to do it. And nobody now could tell you who that person was and what their goals and their ambitions were. And that's what we want to do, is create it, let it be a tool, let people use it, let communities reconnect and grow and, live in really awesome houses. And that's it. Take that out of the equation and let everybody live their life.
What was the reaction you got from the places that make the trusses, when you turned up with this idea?
I had built, over the 4 or 5 years I'd been in Canada doing structural design, I'd built a relationship with this guy, Eldon, who's now since retired, and every now and then I'd give him a call and go, I've got this roof I need to do, complex, structure, multiple roof planes. So we'd built up a bit of a relationship. So I kind of sneakily designed up the roof, the truss house frame, and then I put it on top of a garage. It was quite a thing in a garage. In Canada, people like that garage with a bit of an attic space. So I was like, I've got this client, and they want to do this thing, and I kind of sketched it up. And the garage, and then I kind of came up with this idea of like, it's going to be this walls. I just made it all up, to kind of drew it all up as if this was just an anonymous thing. And I said, do you think it would work? So I sent it to him, and he's had a look, and he gave me a call, and he's like, it's pretty, I'm pretty sure. So I said, well, can you help me optimize it? Can you help me, what's the maximum span without using too much wood? Like, we really spent a little bit of time working out what was the best use of material for this thing to be, really low waste, lightweight, cost effective. And then I said, so just between you and I said, if we just took the walls of the garage away and we just set this thing straight onto the foundation, I said, this is what I've been working on. This is what I want to do. And he kind of was like, yeah, that'll work. That'll work. Yeah. Well, yeah, that'll work. He kind of had that probably at the time 40 years of experience flicking back and forth and analyzing, and he's like, that'll work. And then he's kind of, okay. So I came back a few weeks later. I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm ordering it. And we did, quite quietly. And he was my...
What was it like? What was it like putting those trusses up?
It was, we were videoing, and it was freezing. It was like in the -20s, mass excitement. This thing was coming flat back. The trusses come stacked on the back of a truck, and it showed up on site. And the guys who'd been putting in the steel foundation had been there for about 2 days, battling bedrock and, frozen soil. And there was a little fire going. And I just remember, because we were quite remote, seeing this truck appear through the trees. I was like, this is going to happen. It was very much a surreal moment.
Love it.
In the freezing cold. I remember sitting in the little machine, the little mini digger. I'd sit in the machine just to be warm, to wait for this thing to show up. And the builders were, the head guy, awesome, incredible supporter. And then his guys were standing around going, oh, what are we doing? Like, are we really doing this? And really dubious, pretty dubious about what it was going to be. And, it turned out to be my home. It was an awesome learning, lots of learning, so much learning.
And so going back, just for the listeners who can't see this yet, is that the trusses are normally just the roof, but the trusses now are the roof and the sides and the floor.
All as one piece.
All as one piece.
That's the fundamental. Because you could make them separately and then connect them, but the idea, there's no connections.
Yep.
Stand it up, put some bits of wood, close it in, create the box.
And the thing is, when you look at it, you look at the way we build houses now, and you go, why hasn't somebody thought of this earlier?
So I think fundamentally that it was not an idea that was new in itself, as in, I don't believe that nobody thought of it. I don't believe that at no point in the last 60 years did somebody go... There's actually, when you go back through the patents, because I patented the system, when you go back through the patents around that 60s, between 1960s up to the 80s, there were lots of really harebrained ideas around using trusses and making orbs and, creatively trying to do geometric shapes that we're pushing the bounds of what could a roof be if you use roof trusses. So there was a lot of, a spark. This system, even 10 years ago, would have been deemed unnecessarily wasteful of floor area, potentially, because the idea around insulation wasn't there. People weren't interested in putting insulation in their houses. So the reason, in a New Zealand sense, that houses are 4 inches is A, because it's the cheapest way of doing it, and B, because you don't really need any more than 3 inches of insulation. And there's no knowledge around it, because it doesn't matter if you're burning energy to beat the bang, because energy was cheap.
Yep.
So when I went through the design and the patent process, it actually I was quite astounded it hadn't been done before in that regard. And what the patent was on, or the 2 patents were on, was the use of a truss system for the body of the house. So it's not a geometric shape, or it's a process of taking a roof system and turning it into a house system. And that innovation within that has, I don't even think I've even explored it to within a fraction of what I know people will be able to do. And the reason we patented it was to create value around the process in itself that allowed us to monetize totally differently to the building industry.
Yep.
So the industry, you buy a product out of your merchant, they've marked it up, they bought out a supplier, very traditional. The builder who picks that product and brings it to site does his time, he adds his margin. And then, a lot of builders will get trade pricing. So you get the full price, they get a trade price, so they, rightly so, they're making their money in a way that allows them to live and build their own houses. And in a fundamental sense, just because to build a warmer house that's more high performance, you have to spend a lot of time in engineering, you have to add a lot more product. It becomes a premium product. Houses in New Zealand of this standard are $10,000 square meter. They're almost 3 times the cost of a traditional home when you really get into the custom design and certification of that type of building. So for us, if we were the builders, which we were in Canada, we just charged a license and project management fee, and then everything was at cost. So mostly kitchens, bathrooms, stuff that I'm like, I have no interest in making money off of that. That does not add value. I'm not adding value to that for my clients. There was no advantage for that side of it. So what we worked out was, if the community collectively structure a deal and they're going to build 12 houses, we have a license fee we charge for the use of the system, and then every dollar saving by that community or by that individual goes straight into their pocket. So if your friends, your whānau come and they build your house with you, and you take out 5 days of labor of 4 people at, $60 an hour, that goes to the client, not allowing us as builders to go, hey, we're selling a product that should be $10,000 square meter. We're going to sell it at 8.
Yep.
What we've done is remove that lever, because that was our big fear when we came to New Zealand. People were like, oh, you've got to find a group home builder. Like, well, group home builders make the money the way they make their money, and they're really good at it, and they're not going to switch into a system that fundamentally is not designed for that. So it comes down again to that autonomy and that self-determination. It's clear, it's transparent, and it's at cost pricing, which is so the opposite to the construction industry as a whole, even with monopolies on products and, a lot of the lobbying and stuff that goes on in New Zealand that has resulted in massive price increases. That's how we were able to build at the same cost as a traditional home. You're just buying the materials at cost. You're paying your trades. Whatever you do to save money, you save it. We're not increasing our margin, and that's key.
Every winter, we had a period of time where New Zealand runs out of electricity to heat homes.
Yeah.
And the cry goes out, well, we just need to produce more electricity. And of course that's not the answer, because we need, as humanity needs to learn how to use less energy in how we operate.
Absolutely.
And so this is I was just thinking about, from that point of view, that if we had 50% of the houses built were truss houses, in 10 years' time we wouldn't be running out of electricity, because the homes wouldn't need that peak warming. And then I was reminded of, we had a member, Eva Glewis, and she was an architect, and unfortunately Eva died of cancer about 3 years ago, but she'd be loving this, Kim, because she built this house in Dunedin, and she used to put up these photos that it was -3 degrees outside and it was 22 degrees inside the house, and she had no heating.
Wow.
And I don't know how she did that, but I remember at the time it was her thing, so I don't know. And she just said, and she was a designer of all sorts of things. She was just a fanatical designer.
Yeah.
And loved good design. And, she'd put this up and she'd point at this and go, why can't we build more houses like this?
Knowledge. So much of it's knowledge. The builders we took to New Zealand who are passionate about this area of high performance building are self-motivated, they're driven, they're learning a lot on YouTube, they're watching seminars. In a traditional sense, it is complex. We've got such a simple way of doing it, not just the insulation, but this membrane, this layer on the inside. What we foresee, and a key component when we talk with communities, so the conversation we're having today, is that we're able to do this transfer of knowledge in a very simple and organic way. When somebody's learning about, as you now have started to notice, where you drive around and you see the wood everywhere, all of those walls are wood with lots of bits of insulation. It's like that quantum leap. Your brain sees it, gets it, understands it, and then sees it everywhere. And the antithesis to that, what's the way of not thermally bridging inside to outside, is one of the key components of high performance building. And that's such, in many ways, doing it with traditional materials in a traditional way, it becomes complex because you're trying to break bridges. You're really getting into the nitty gritty of where you intentionally put each piece of wood, and that's not sustainable. It's not a technique you can teach somebody by watching 30 minutes on a YouTube video, and it becomes a language, and then you feel like you don't know what everybody's talking. It just becomes hard and difficult. So the reason not everybody can do it and has been doing it in New Zealand is because it is complex, and it requires really a thorough understanding, because you've got to solve problems as you go. You know, you're really at the cutting edge in New Zealand right now of that kind of thinking. So for people who do it and experience what it's like to live in that warm, dry home and go, oh, you know, this is why this is a human right. That was the piece. I would lose sleep that I wasn't building enough houses in Canada, because I'm like, people would walk into the house that I built, the first one, and burst into tears just at the potential for people to live in a house of that quality, for want of a better word, at the price that we were able to build those houses. Like, it was quite moving, but also quite scary, because you're going, shit, we can never do this fast enough. And we could never do it fast enough. And that's where New Zealand's at a cusp right now of, you know, the government is putting a lot of time into building to those standards, setting out those standards. What do they look like? And doing big developments at that quality. And it's much easier to do a bigger development at a higher performance, because you've only got a certain skin, you've got more boxes within the envelope. So doing standalone homes is the hardest process. The smaller the home, the harder it gets. And we've taken that anomaly out. We've actually said, well, it doesn't matter if it's 50 square meters or 30 square meters, you're getting that same result, and you're doing it in a way that your community are doing it with you, and everybody understands, goes, everywhere I go now I see thermal bridges. That's enough. That's enough of a quantum leap to start people thinking, you know, warm, dry. There's the term we use in Canada, which hasn't really come into New Zealand, which is simple to understand, is what's called net zero ready. So your house is basically ready if you added alternate energy on your roof or wind to perform. So it's using minimal amount of energy that you could be self-sufficient. That's the goal with a truss house. So passive, which is you don't need heating. Whereas we, you know, there's a lot of advantage in that. It's also that it's quite complex and certifiers and doors and tests. What we're saying is, if you can get your own home to the point that you can generate your own power and be self-sufficient, you are in, you know, 80%, you're 80% of the way there. And that's what we built the houses in Canada too. So you take your house here and you add solar, and you can still run this house the way that it was designed to run. That's what we're trying to bring in as a normal sense.
And so when we're hit with these massive storms and everything's disrupted, that becoming more and more autonomous is going to become more and more important.
Yeah, financial autonomy, you know, your own use of your own energy. I remember, because where we were when I built our house, quite common, people have generator systems installed. So you have an $8,000 to $10,000 generator sitting on a concrete pad outside your house, because the power might go out for 2-3 days, and your major issue is, what do you do for heating? So we had our barbecue, and then if the power went out, I didn't put in a generator. I said, I'm just going to see how the first year goes, and if I find that I've got no power for days on end, then, you know, we'll see whether we need to make that commitment or not. But, you know, I would wake in the morning and the power would have gone out at some point in the night. It might be minus 20 outside, but I wouldn't really feel it. But like, oh, it's a little nippy, you know. And I'd lived in houses at that point that the heating would come on, and you're like, oh, it's cozy and warm. The minute it went off, within 5 minutes, you're going, ooh.
Yeah, cold.
And that's the difference with, you'll still lose heat in a well-insulated house, but what creates heat? Usually your lights, your fridge, you know, people moving around, operation of your washing machine, that all creates heat. So your friend the architect will have been in a house where just everything that just hums along is creating enough heat for the house to stay warm. Plus things like solar mass. You know, we did an analysis before I built the house. I took it to an energy modeler and I said, okay, I've got all this insulation, but let's talk about windows. I said, I'm not sure what to do. And we did the model, and he said, well, if you use your double glazing, he said, your heating load is going to be 3,000 kilowatts a year. He said, your cooling load is going to be 5,000 kilowatts a year. I was like, he said, the cost of you cooling your house down, which always gets missed, is actually going to be more than what it's going to cost you to heat it, because those windows are going to let in so much solar gain that during the day, by 10 o'clock in the morning, you're going, oh my God, it's 30 degrees in here. And that was one of those aha moments for me. It was like that quantum leap of understanding, going, actually, this is everywhere. This isn't just Canada where it's cold. Yep. It's every house in New Zealand that's floor-to-ceiling windows, without the consideration to what's the sun doing. And as this planet heats up, there's going to be there's going to be no escape from that need to cool. We did it for this whole past summer. It was either raining and storming, or it was so hot, you couldn't move. And that is the bit where energy consumption is going to be spent more on cooling than it ever has been. And that's just been experienced across the UK, Scotland, Ireland, North America. People are living in 40-degree temperatures who've never really experienced more than 28 degrees.
Yep.
And suddenly you need to be self-sufficient, and you need to have your own energy supply so that you can keep yourself cool. That's it.
Look, I've experienced 44 degrees temperature once. That was up in Toronto, and it was frightening.
It's, yeah. You can, as a kid, it's like, would you rather be too hot or too cold? It's like, well, you can warm yourself up. You very, very hard to cool it down.
Yep.
Cool us down.
And that was at 8 o'clock at night. It had been hot and all sorts of odd things that happened in the city that day because of the heat. People just spun out and did weird shit.
Yeah, and cities are if you took Auckland on a 44-degree day, pavements are melting, but fundamentally the concrete that's everywhere, it sucks in and absorbs all that heat. So the evenings where it cools down for us on the coast or anywhere else, it will be a mass exodus. People will not be able to live in cities in that kind of an environment. It sounds all very doom and gloom, but when you go back in history, which I really enjoy listening to that, the evolution of the planet and the role that the tectonic plate shifts have created in our energy systems, and New Zealand is very much on the cusp of that volcanic tectonic activity, and it will not take a lot for a shift to really start to affect the climate here. And I intend to kind of be climate ready.
Kim, you've got to go to a meeting soon. You've got to go to a meeting, and we're going to cut this off now because not cut it off. That's a terrible phrase. We're going to bring it to an end.
A natural conclusion.
It's over between us, Kim.
It's over. It's not you. It's me. Actually, it's me.
Kim, what have we missed out?
I think maybe the resounding opportunity for New Zealand. I feel like New Zealand is in an incredible position in the world right now. I think COVID put New Zealand in the spotlight. I think New Zealand's had its opportunity to become, almost that teenager becoming an adult in terms of global output of food, technology, blockchain. New Zealand is a real innovative country. It's full of people, the number 8 wire mentality. I think this is going to be a really interesting time for New Zealand as a country to create community around each other and go, okay, hey, we've just survived COVID. We've just survived all the uncertainty. The rest of the world is like us looking for the word recession in every news feed at the moment. And New Zealand has that opportunity to continue to be the country that kind of didn't fall foul to the fear and stuck with each other and really came out of this period of uncertainty and growth with measurable success. I think that I feel privileged to be here every day. Wake up, look at the beach, look at the water, the people we meet. It's resoundingly positive, I think, for New Zealand. I'm glad I'm not in anywhere else in the world right now. I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world right now if I had a choice.
It's a great message to finish on, especially, I think as Kiwis we can be a bit complacent. Yeah. And it's really interesting seeing what the fellowship is, 80%, 75% internationals, and how much they appreciate the country and what you can do here and the freedom we've got here, and we can get on with stuff. And that maybe, we need a bit of a kick in the arse in New Zealand and go, actually, we're in this really fabulous place down there. Let's make the most of it.
New Zealand is in the top 5 per capita worst carbon emitting countries in the world right now. Kiwis are complacent, but I think fundamentally great in a crisis. We're part of the crisis right now. New Zealand is in the top 5. New Zealand and Australia are, and that's a crisis. And I think mobilizing people who are really good in a crisis can only serve this country really, really well.
And with that, Kim, I also hear people, we're only 5,000 people, it doesn't matter what we do. And I go, we are one of the most influential countries in the world. We just need to step into that and understand that. Yeah. And we have seen that this week with the funeral of the Queen. And you watch that and how many times the cameras flick to our Prime Minister, and whether you like her politics or not, more often, than just about anybody else, they would use her name or flick to her, on the screen. There is a reason for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
I feel incredibly proud of our country in that respect. And you're right, we have got to get our act together on this whole energy, carbon, and step into this. Yeah.
And you can't live an intentional life when you're living in a place of trauma or a place of poverty. So you cannot sit down and really take time to think about your person. I'm recycling. What am I buying? How much packaging? You can't. You can't focus on that world if your own personal world is one of crisis and management. And you get that undercurrent right now in New Zealand. People are panicked because there is nowhere to live. Food is expensive. There is an element of you've got to sort your own ship out first. And I think New Zealand is really close to bottoming out and starting to rebuild and really recognizing that self-determination for people is the only way that the world in itself, self-determination, an actual choice. And that is so hard to fix because we've all got to do it for ourselves, but we've all got to have the support of those around us to bring us up. And I think that not all is not lost in New Zealand. I feel for a lot of other countries, it's too far. The tipping point has been passed. New Zealand has an awesome opportunity to actually step up and help each other. That's it. You help your neighbor, whether it's building their house, sorting out their food needs, whatever, the way New Zealand did, rallied in COVID. It can be done. It's proven to be done. We didn't turn to fighting. We didn't turn to riots. New Zealand turned to let's help our neighbours get through, and I think that's what's coming.
Kim, welcome to New Zealand.
Thank you.
And enjoy the journey with Trust House. And I am really excited about this podcast going out, and we'll be promoting and going, listen to this fucking thing. This is important.
Bear with the boring building science bit.
It's, it's wonderful. And yeah, have fun with it, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.